Good.
Okay. I call to order this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District. It is Thursday, April 11th, and the time is 3:06 p.m. We will have a roll call starting from my far right.
Jan Michael Greenberg.
Sandy Kravitz, Albert Perleberg,
Allison Beckham, and Patty Beckman. All board members are present, and we do have a quorum. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and Board Member Beckham, will you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would like to make a motion to approve the agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Greenberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Moving on to our first information discussion item, 4A, a feasibility study regarding Cherokee Elementary School. Dr. Picard?
Thank you, President Beckman and members of the board. This evening's agenda is to have a report from Orchid Winslow, who has worked in conjunction with the CM at-risk core construction to do a feasibility study after a long, now 4 months of meetings with the Cherokee community and studying the site at Cherokee Elementary School and the various plans to determine whether they recommend a rebuild of the facility or a renovation of the facility. So today's agenda is to hear their report and to answer questions that you have, and so that we are clear and would come back on April 16th, Tuesday evening, with an action item based on their findings and the answers that you get to your questions. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Tom O'Neill, the partner at Orchid Winslow, who has been heading this project.
Thank you, Dr. Creekart. Board President, Governing Board, Dr. Creekart, we're pleased to be here tonight to share with you, or this afternoon, to share with you our recommendation. It's not our decision, it's a recommendation. So as a reminder, this is our team. I believe that the core group is on the top and have been very effective in the process of exploring the options of replacement with high innovation or renovation with high innovation or replacement. But we've been supported by a cast of about 35 in our educational studio to facilitate some large meetings in the community. I'd also like to introduce Core Construction. They are the CM selected for this project, and they were essential in some of the final data-driven decisions for our recommendation. John Thomason and Mike Pilkington will be sharing with you at the tail end of this presentation some information. Again, our process is built on transparency, collaboration, and consensus. It's essential to bring in the community and listen to what their needs are, their desires are, and formulate an approach, whether it be renovation or replacement, that respects the desires of the community and the user group at a whole. I might say that Walt and a couple of members of our visionary team are here tonight also, and here in support of, and could collaborate if necessary. So our last community meeting, we unveiled this recommendation. It had full support of the visionary group, and so we went to the community, but we also wanted to make sure they had a voice in this conversation. So from the very beginning of that community meeting, we had electronic correspondence so they could offer up questions, they could offer up concerns during that community meeting. So we offered our perspective, but we also brought into the conversation their concerns and their questions. Overview of this project. It's in the town of Paradise Valley. It's a substantial building with no windows, concrete, cast-in-place concrete structures, and we looked at how best to approach this replacement or renovation. We didn't want to use just a metric of cost as that decision maker. We wanted to look at globally a number of items, and they have built the foundation for whether it's renovation or new construction, a very strong concept for development. Memorable goals was the first piece that we looked at, and those will resonate. Those 4 memorable goals should resonate in either design and carry forth elements of design in the final product. Facilities needs, also very important. Existing conditions, understanding that existing building and what are the challenges with it. Site analysis, understanding the challenges of the site. Charrette process, it was interesting, and we'll share with you later in this presentation some of the activities relative to that. The cost model and construction duration. Construction duration has 2 elements to it. It has a cost. The longer you run a construction project, or higher your construction general conditions are, but also it's the impact on that operating campus and the community. The longer you're working on that site, the more disruption you have to that community and that site. So our process began very, very broad. We wanted to solicit input in terms of what are the memorable goals that the community would like to see in this project. Then we drilled into what are the relationships on this campus. I keep using the analogy as you don't want the dumpster at the front door. So let's look at what are the relationships, and we did find some very important elements in terms of how the building should be organized to best suit the functional aspect of this project. Then we introduced the charrette process, which we had built a program, and we worked with a number of different groups, and we looked at the relationships and what kind of organization could come out of this as a final result. And we extracted from that some relationships that are in a smaller micro level. So tonight I'm bringing the recommendation forward to you, and that's the foundation for our ultimate design. While we're doing these activities, we had a group in the background looking at the existing conditions, poking up in the ceiling as you can see here, but looking at a number of the aspects of that existing building to better understand our challenges and our opportunities. We looked at that site in very, very close detail in terms of what are the challenges and what are the opportunities with that site. So to cut to the chase, we have a recommendation that is metric driven. In the replacement, 15 out of 15 of the memorable goals can be hit, can be addressed. In the renovation, we fall short of that, 10 out of 15. I'll get into more detail on that. Facilities needs, existing conditions, site analysis, and charrette activity. 38 out of 40 were addressed and accomplished in the replacement. 28 out of 40 were challenged in the renovation. So we're starting to build a ranking here that directs us towards the replacement rather than renovation. Cost model. This is where CORE came into play. They looked at this and they'll share with you their analysis. It proves if renovation with high innovation will actually cost us roughly about 2% more than a replacement. We didn't want to use that as a driver. We want to look at it as a whole. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, project duration has some elements to it that are not only cost driven but also disruptive, and we want to minimize that disruption. Scott?
I'm Scott Sawinski with Orcutt Winslow, and as the project architect, am working side by side with Fatima and Tom and the rest. And so this slide is just a Cherokee at a glance, and this is the first portion of that site analysis. And so this was basically starting to establish who are we talking about within Cherokee and what was unique about Cherokee that we needed to keep in mind as we started to look at this, this specific site and school. And so the site analysis took into consideration things like the parking overflow, anything that was existing currently that would impact how we would look at developing a design moving forward, whether it's site drainage, views in and out of the site, weather conditions, prevailing winds, sun angle, all of those types of things. And then in addition, those parallel efforts were existing conditions analysis. So this was a little bit more of a technical document where we had our consultants, electrical engineers, plumbing engineers, civil engineers come and look at the site and then rank the conditions and recommend actions. And so these two slides give you a recap of what was found there. We have a book deliverable that has the whole report in there to review, but this is the summary.
So community forum number 1 was the activity where we generated the memorable goals. And again, we came up with 4 memorable goals that should resonate with this design when it's completed. Bless you. So we asked questions of the community. What are your, I shouldn't read this, you can see, question was asked, and live they were able to respond to it in terms of what would their response be, and that started to drive towards a memorable goal. Security was high on their list, and the present existing conditions had a big challenge towards achieving security. Another aspect of our design, we engaged STUGO, the student government, to express from their perspective what would be desired in this ultimate design. They did collages, and they brought forward their thoughts and their ideas, which they will see and resonate in this ultimate design. So our 4 memorable goals: safety and wellness, uniquely Cherokee, student-centric learning, high-performance learning environment. Community forum number 2, we conducted what we call a World Cafe. We had 3 stations set up in the cafeteria, and we had a couple architects stationed at each station. And we looked at educational spaces, support and specialty spaces, and site and outdoor spaces. And again, talking about their relationships and how they should formulate in this plan to best function in the school. You can see here the graphic that illustrates on the right side there the metrics of relationship. So with the program and the relationship diagram, that sets us up for forum number 3. And it was we call design charrette. We took this program and broke it down into little boxes, colored boxes, and then we worked with the visionary group, we worked with the community group, and we worked in our own studio, and we worked with facilities to generate concepts. Now, we weren't looking for the ultimate solution. What we were looking for is great ideas. But also, it demonstrated to the community and to the participants that the challenges that we're going to embark upon in developing a concept here. What are the challenges that we're going to be wrestling with? And as we extract some of these ideas out of it, they'll transform into this design, and those participants will see their fingerprint on this design, which I think gives them some ownership and some excitement. You can see the chief of police in the lower right-hand corner was participating. He's one of our visionary members and has offered some really good insight. So these are the options from the committee, visioning committee, from the community, from facilities, and from our own staff in our studio. Scott.
So these are what we're calling vignettes, and so we're getting specific on the titles because we don't want to confuse you with concepts, options, whatever. So vignettes are specifically just a visual representation of an idea, and all of these were written or created in a way where they were a positive. So, for example, that example that Tom brought up about discrete service access, number 16. This would say, keep your dumpster away from your front door. There's different things like the one right above it, adequate vehicular queuing. Some of the major concerns right now is that the overflow of parking, there's not enough queuing on site, so all the traffic is now off the site waiting to get on the site to get their kids. We have 40 of these that all reacted to little gems of good ideas that came out from all of those activities to date, and that helped us form this master list of sorts of things that this building wanted to be able to accomplish and do as it moves forward. So all of these are separate ideas that have a description below, and then at the end, the compilation of this data was then ranked. So the left side of the screen, you see the memorable goals. The right side of the screen, you see the vignettes. And it's important to also say the difference between a 1 and a 0 is a 1 is that we felt that the design could relatively easily accomplish that goal. And a 0 would mean more like you had to move a lot more mountains to make that happen. And so the 1 or 0, some could argue, is a little bit subjective, but it's a combination of our professional opinions, the industry, as well as working with the community to find out what's important to them. And then we reviewed these types of things with the visioning committee to give us a good handle on whether we were grading these accurately.
I think the meeting with the visionary committee was very interactive. there was some changing of rankings through that dialogue. I think that was very important.
And so the options, we'll just run through them quickly. So the renovation, the design utilizes the existing hexagons. And so as a shape used by an architect, the hexagon works great. It's creating a language, and as you continue the design within that language, it makes most sense to use the same language. And so this design, or option I should say, keeps with that hexagonal separation of spaces, and the new building that is built also uses a lot of the same concepts, so it'll feel like a whole campus at the end. And then this will phase out as this is the existing campus as it stands, and then the new facility that would house the multi-purpose PE, kitchen, vocal and band strings would be built first, and then over a summer vacation or summer break, the balance of the site and the core building could be completed. And then one by one with swing space, the rest of these would be able to be accomplished with the demolition of that last building to complete the campus. And then once looking at this, we looked at those 40 vignettes and 15 memorable goals, and instead of going line item by line item for a consolidation of what it is that we found, we broke these into 6 categories: security, circulation and wayfinding, uniquely Cherokee, pods, flexibility, and learning space performance. And the X or the check next to those represents whether we thought that the option could fulfill those. And so from a security perspective, for example, the reason why this gets an X versus a check is as it's currently laid out, some of the things like line of sight and transparency for supervision currently are an issue, and then with a remodel would likely stay an issue without a lot of remediation to change what is the issue. For example, as you have a bunch of or 25 kids and you're moving them through the campus, as soon as you turn that corner, you're continuously turning a corner and you're losing the rest of the kids behind you. And so with that, the line of sight, unless you start to cut openings in that concrete, you're not going to be able to see through corners. The line of sight is more of a challenge. So as we're looking at that, it's harder for this campus to earn the security credit than the replacement. And it's not either or. It was kind of like not which one wins, but just in isolation, does this find it easy to accomplish that or not? The circulation and wayfinding, this was another thing where if this is your first time going to this campus, it's going to be a little bit harder to figure out where you're going and where you're parking because it's not inherently intuitive. The third time, maybe that's different, right? But it's inherent properties for circulation and wayfinding, and that is just, it's both vehicular, but it's also pedestrian. So through the campus, we look through these things. Uniquely Cherokee, obviously, if you retain the building, you're going to have a lot easier time retaining that character, what's making it uniquely Cherokee, so that's a check. The pods were also something within all of these hexagonal clusters. The center of those classrooms are a breakout pod for collaboration, and that's probably one of the most near and dear to the community things that need to be retained moving forward. And so obviously this gets that check. The flexibility, looking at this building over the next 20, 40, 60 years, how does it stack flexibility-wise? I'll go back to that original statement where I said, if you're going to use the hexagons as your rule and your language as you design the building, it works great if you'd like to divide that space by 6 or 3. But as soon as you want to divide that space by 7, it starts to really break down and create some kooky angles and things like that. And so that's why from a future flexibility, if everything was equal, we wouldn't choose that because it's less flexible moving forward. And then learning space performance reacts to things like ample headroom, daylight, thermal comfort. The established roof structure is going to constrain the roof height while you're in the classrooms. And then it's really labor intensive to get the saw cuts into the concrete, to get the light and transparency in So there are things like that that kind of set the baseline standard of what a high-performing classroom is today that this would struggle to keep pace with. The replacement, before I go into this, there's a reason why these look very much similar to the charrette activity that we did, is that this is not meant to be a design or a layout, a floor plan. It's more of a diagram that was easy to relate to as you watched this develop. And so I say that because it's still a work in progress. And then the facing of this option, the existing campus, as before, the classroom buildings can be built outside of that envelope in their entirety in the first phase, allowing then after that the students all at once to move into that, and then demolish the 2 southern pods, which would give space for the balance of the site, and then the rest of the students would move in, or I should say not the students, but the pre-K, Panda, kindergarten would move in, and then the core campus portion would move in. And so the take-homes of this was that security, the line of sight is better, the level of transparency that you'll be able to get, the controlled points of entry. The other thing is that I should have mentioned this, the other option, as it is now, all the doors to get into those classroom buildings are on the perimeter. So there's, I don't know, 25 doors to get into one of those pods. And so in lockdown procedures or whatever there might be, there's just some things to overcome. Whereas a new facility, you're going to be able to say, here's our lock-in vestibule. Once you're on campus, now you're on campus. It's layers of control there. Circulation and wayfinding, this is a lot easier to find the front door. Uniquely Cherokee, the campus-style building footprints, not all consolidated into one, is how this building can react to the campus style that was created by the hexagons. And so we feel that we can definitely accomplish the garden style campus feel, but then also start to get into the blending of the interior and exterior of the spaces that makes Cherokee special. And so we felt confident on that one. This creates the same pods, but just in a different configuration. And then again, it's flexible to move forward. And then as a brand new building, we can accomplish that learning space performance.
So with that said, we'd like to have John Thomason and Mike Pilkington come up and talk a little bit about cost.
Thank you for having us here. Any questions you want to have, please ask us, and we'll go through this program for you. We're very happy to be part of another Scottsdale project. So first I want to do just a real quick agenda. We're going to go over some cost history of both where we came from things, the replacement, how the escalation will affect it, because we're looking at not starting construction, as we're told, till January. So we're going to show you how we've come up with those numbers, obviously then the renovation, and then the comparison between the two of them. So for new buildings, we're going to relate back to the most familiar projects with Scottsdale, and that is Pima and Hopi. And on the left is the information of the school, the size, and we can go through. The biggest thing what we want to relate back to, our original contract was $19.8 million. Adjacent ways, that is both bond money and adjacent ways. So the adjacent ways, which is a different taxation, you know, was for the off-sites, the fire lanes, security, stuff like that, was $9 million. The bond dollars that went against the bond, 18.9. Through working with value engineering, saving contingency money, through 2 change orders, we have returned $1.5 million. So the final construction contract, including adjacent ways, is $18.3 million. So these are where we're going to base some of our prices on in the escalation. Pima, the same thing. Don't have to go through everything. Original contract, $18 million one, and then adjacent ways, a little over $600,000. Bond dollars, $17.4. Once again, working with, and I will tell you, Dennis Rayler is a key person of saving these contingency dollars and looking for better ways to value engineer things. Without Dennis, a lot of this would not be done. So returning $1.1 million. So one thing I will say, we want to make sure we're fiscally responsible to the taxpayers, to the school district. We use your bond monies efficiently so you can put as much money into your facility as possible. Final contract 16.9 on this. So Mike's going to go over kind of where we're projecting things to be by January.
So there's some data that we track. The construction economics for the greater Phoenix area, specifically for these projects. On the right-hand side, you can see per year, all the way back 2007, and this chart actually goes all the way up to end of 2019, but tracking per quarter what the construction economics have done in the Phoenix area. And so on the left-hand side, you can see where Hopi and Pima fall on that set of data, and where Cherokee will fall on that set of data. So we have tracked that on the construction economics, there's 12.77% of cost difference between the two, just when you average all of the construction cost data.
What Mike is saying is when we sign the GMP for Hopi and Pima, that's that line item on the left, Cherokee in January, that's where we'll be. And this should have scrolled all the way down to this year, and what that is the 12.77 escalation between 17, the fall of 17, and now what those increases will be, projecting escalation over the history of tracking that.
About 8 quarters. So basically, if we take that data with the cost escalation data, with the data that John presented before, our GMP, original GMP contract value, if you were to take that into the January 2020 start that we're projecting for Cherokee, this would be the data escalated to what we call today's dollars. So the GMP contract value, $19.8 million for Hopi, essentially in today's dollars would be $22.4 million or $333 per square foot. If you were to take the Pima data that we just shared, $18.1 million escalated to today's dollars, that would be $20.4 million, $303 per square foot. What we received from Orcutt Winslow and all of their consultants was a tremendous amount of data on all of the existing systems, all the different structure, all of the existing conditions of that facility. And we really used this when we were analyzing what the cost data would be for the renovation portion of the project. We looked at, a lot of the civil is in pretty decent shape, but we would have to bring utilities to the building for the fire risers because there's currently no fire sprinkler in the building. On the structural systems, they're actually in pretty good shape because you got a lot of the precast concrete, but we would have to replace a lot of the roof deck. On the architectural side, a lot of the finishes, in fact, all of them would have to be replaced because they're condition. On the plumbing side, all of the underground plumbing from their consultant showing that it's in pretty bad shape, so we'd have to replace all of that. Mechanical system, same thing. On the electrical side, a lot of the gear and the services were actually in pretty good shape, but we would have to reroute a lot of distribution panels and all of the convenience outlets. So what we came up with here was a comparison between the two. So we looked at both renovation and replacement, and we looked at different groups of our cost data, and looked at if we were to renovate, what that would cost, and replace what that would cost. In the renovation portion, we didn't just get recently complete renovation projects with the school district, but we have been doing a lot of them over periods of time. So we were able to look at a lot of data on what it would take to replace or renovate a elementary school, along with all of those systems recommended by the consultants that needed work to be done. So but we took all that data and looked at renovation and replacement. You can see how they differ from demolition. On demolition, renovating does take longer because you have selective demo rather than complete demo. You have a lot more equipment and it takes a lot more time to get in and selectively demo scopes of work. The earthwork on the replacement would be more expensive because we'd have to build all new building pads and regrade the entire site. Same thing with site finishes; those would all be new. The structure on the renovation would be cheaper because all of that vertical structure would remain. On the enclosure, the renovation is more expensive because selectively removing and replacing the roofing systems. On the replacement, the finishes are slightly more expensive. Specialties and equipment are about the same. Fire sprinkler on a renovation, getting into those hexagon shaped buildings and all the phasing
It really takes more time, so that more expensive on really all of your mechanical, plumbing, electrical scopes. You know, electrical on the replacement, more expensive because, like we said, the existing electrical system's actually in pretty decent shape. But your low voltage, all your special systems, fire alarm are about the same either way. But really what pushed us over the top on the renovation was really the unknowns. You can see the contingencies are more expensive with the renovation project, getting into a building that we just don't know once we start opening up walls what it's going to look like. And then the general conditions, like Tom was saying, will be on site for longer, so that costs money. So what we're looking at right now with all of that data is it is appearing to be with everything, all of our cost history, cost data, looking at OP, PEMA, looking at the consultant's recommendations. Right now, the renovation is slightly more expensive, 2% is what we're coming up with. So.
And that was all we had. Hopefully short and sweet, and if there's questions, be happy to, any architectural, Tom or Mike, I help out on.
So that brings us to our recommendation. We are recommending a replacement of Cherokee rather than a renovation with high innovation. And at the end of the presentation, we also show the duration of this. It's the milestones. We would like to come back to the board in June and share with you the progress of the design and some cost updates at that point. In our interview, we were asked, would we memorialize this study in a book? And so, obviously, there's a lot of data out there. We have assembled a book of this study, and we'd like to share that with you. We have limited copies. We can copy more, but we're proud of the work that's been accomplished, and it's backed up with a lot of data. And at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions.
I'll start.
I'll
start. In our discussions, we talked about the start of the project, the start of the construction, or the prep work at the site and so forth. And this is where I know contractors love it when architects make promises. But I thought you said that when you go to city for approval, there are some things that can be done at the site during that approval time to get started, so that once that comes, you can hit the ground running, so that the real start time wouldn't really be January, but they begin to see some things being done, prep work earlier in the fall.
I'd like to take Dr. Creed-Carter first pass at that, and then let Core respond. You're absolutely right. The architect has set up a schedule, and we did that in a vacuum before Core was selected. And so we need to collaborate on that schedule. One of the things we'll be submitting to the town of Paradise Valley for third-party review, let's see here in October 10th to be exact. That would allow the contractor to do a number of things, some site prep, some site make safe, mobilize, and also order some long lead items. So, but I'm speaking as an architect, and I would refer to the contractor in terms of what their desires are.
Two issues on this. One, what will City of Paradise Valley, Town of Paradise Valley, sorry, allow us to at-risk? We've done at-risk grading before. As plans are in, we'd like to sit down with the city and Orcott Winslow and go through what we can do ahead of time. Like Tom said, make safe. The other things, and we are more prepared to do, is multiple GMPs. It's always better or nice to do one GMP as opposed to multiple. We can do a GMP 1 that has maybe grading, paving, and makes safe, stuff like that up for foundations. We can do early and start and then finalize the other GMP. But if we're in October, we're going to be pretty close to having a full GMP. But yes, we can definitely do a phase start early, you know, with both the school schedule, the architect's drawings and documents, and city, town approval also. Those are the things that are really important.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Board Member Greenberg?
Just to clarify a couple things, in this presentation, that 12.3% increase in construction costs, that red box, you were saying it should actually be the current months between Hopi and now?
Correct.
Okay. And can you just clarify what you meant by speaking to the city about construction manager at risk And that, unless if I
That is basically, some towns, municipalities allow you to go at risk, meaning they will offer partial approval of permits, say grading and foundation permit only, while then they're reviewing the rest of the structural electrical, where if like both of them, one of the first things you're gonna do is a building, if it's the renovation, we're adding that first building, and possibly at that time, they could give us a foundation permit that allow us to build the building pad, get the concrete foundations in, while they're finalizing the review of the rest of the whole project.
Right, and so I did mishear slightly. So then the at-risk part is that they might not approve it.
The at-risk part is usually they do approve up to that part, is they may come back and say, you have a 8x8 steel column supporting this. During our review, you need a 10x10. So that's the at-risk that we may have to change some foundations, and we need a bigger footing for that column, stuff like that. So we're, with the documents working with Orcott Winslow, we're saying we've got this, but they may come back. That's at risk on ours. The city says we'll allow you, but we may make changes due to code compliance and our interpretations.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Kravitz.
What capacity, student capacity / enrollment is planned for this new building? I didn't hear that mentioned.
Our program, I believe, right now is at 817 students.
Okay.
So that,
Are we building for 817? Are we building for 850? What's the?
817. But again, at this point, we're halfway through schematic at this stage. And once we have a clear direction as to replace or renovate, we'll dive deep into the program and finalize that and the design. So we're not committed to that 817, but that is the measure we used for developing these two concepts.
can I ask a question while we're on the capacity? It's important to understand, and you can give us hopefully some clarity. When revisiting Hopi and Pima, and you said 775 capacity, are we talking program capacity, or are we just talking square footage facility capacity?
For ours, because that was our analysis, not
Okay,
Tom's.
I'm sorry,
I'm sorry. We just did it by classrooms and figured 25 kids per classroom.
Okay,
basis.
so square footage facility capacity, not program capacity. And that's important for us to understand, because as people look at these schools and they say, you know, you can fit 775 kids in there, well, depending on the programs, maybe you can't.
Or at the grade level.
Yes, okay. Other questions? Board Member Beckham?
Thank you. You had mentioned in your presentation that you have a deliverable with, for the entire report. Is that in here?
Correct. We
And
have.
so what page is that on, just so I can note it?
I believe the first, 20, 25 pages are the study itself, and then the appendix behind that are the supporting documents. And there's various supporting documents, from a preliminary program to our analysis of existing conditions and site analysis and those.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
You mentioned that the visioning committee had input and it changed some of the rankings. Can you share their feedback with us and what changed?
Do you guys remember? I want to say that there were, just on my end, I knew that there were a couple that we started to create that were important, but then we were realizing that they weren't very good metrics to choose between two things. Like, for example, energy efficiency, or like plumbing fixture efficiency. Both of them could achieve that, or so it's like, why even put that in? So we probably started with 45 or 48 and then cut it down to 40. And then some of them changed the wording. One was, I believe, efficient site usage, and instead we changed it. I have to go and look at what it is. But we wordsmithed it to better react to what it was that we were trying to gauge. And then I'm trying to recall if we ever had any one of those get a point or don't get a point, and then there was a disagreement on that. I think predominantly, as displayed, when we explained why there were zeros from our standpoint, we got a lot of agreement.
Yeah, they were really,
Go for it, yeah.
collaborative with us, and also several of the board members, I think, attended some of them, which was very much welcome and appreciated. But yeah, just kind of going back and forth between some of the things that first group, which was the biggest group by far, they had one thing, maybe it was security. But then that's also safety and wellness, kind of putting those together and working on it, and just saying instead of doing just this one thing, let's try to accomplish some things that do more than one thing at the same time. They establish that security, but it also helps with the wellness of the students and staff, windows and things like that. So just kind of, instead of having 200 bullet points, which would have been very hard to do, kind of combining some of them and making it easier to follow.
Yeah, adjusting of the concepts and the wording of them so it said what we wanted them to say.
And it's a group of, but it's well represented. There's parents, there's community members, there's staff, and the police department. So it's everybody kind of puts their touch on it and discuss it. So it's been really, really nice.
And just to clarify, I was under the impression when you said that you meant that very last visioning committee meeting, not the whole committee, that there were some ideas. So it sounds like that didn't happen. It was just over the 3 months in which you had community forums as well as visioning committee that there was feedback given. Is that what you meant?
Well, there's been feedback all along.
Right, but I thought when your
Yeah.
presentation you were specifically saying in the very last visioning committee in which we presented all of this, you received feedback.
We received feedback there,
and
yeah.
that's the feedback
that
I
helped
was
us
referring
adjust
to.
this. Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was just some wordsmithing and things like that. Nothing, not a major idea which you can pinpoint, because that's what I was.
There wasn't a major change to that. I think that at that same meeting, we also talked about the 2 options, and those options probably saw more changes than the verbiage. And so the first time that we showed our ideas and concepts for a replacement is very different from what is shown. Well, it's a logical next step and then next step. And so with their guidance, we were able to kind of massage a couple of things to better accomplish even some more of these. So it's been kind of a back and forth with them.
I don't think anything really material changed that last time, where like
The building changed, the security is a big pinpoint for our community. So they were very aware that we wanted security, and they did change some of the building for
I'm sorry, but we would prefer for the record to speak if you'd come up into the microphone so you're recorded, so that we have that for the record. Any of you are more than welcome to contribute answers to the questions. So from here on out, come up to the microphone so you're recorded. Thank you.
So my next question, in the analysis it showed under renovation there were 28 of 40 points and achieved, and under the rebuild it was 38 of 40. Can you elaborate on what the differences were then?
Sure. So renovation, the first 0, as I'm just reading down, the admin front and center, that verbiage kind of nodded its way towards that intuitive wayfinding, is that the administration is less up front and center than the replacement option, and it's not necessarily in a good location for where the parent parking or visitor parking would be. And so that's why it would get a 0 there. Minimized points of access was the next one down. That would be another thing why the renovation struggles to limit that. For example, a good analysis of this would be, right now all the doors are on the perimeter of the building. That means that the world outside is essentially your hallway. So as soon as you try to limit the doors on the perimeter, now that hallway needs to be inside. And so where does that square footage come from? It comes out of the pods and the classrooms and things like that in order to have that internal circulation to give us the security protocols that we like to follow now. And so that would be one. Passive solar design, that's reacting to if you can get a building on the east-west axis, it gets even northern and southern light year-round, essentially. And with the radial pattern of those hexagons, it's not as clean from that perspective. So it potentially could be less energy efficient and also have more solar issues. Moving down, adequate, let's see, curb appeal. The curb appeal, this got a 0 just from the fact that the admin is pulled in and the heights of the spaces are already set. Like, for example, in the renovation, the cafeteria currently is a high bay space, and it makes most sense in the renovation to move the media center into that space. And typically when you arrive on campus, you need some kind of marker telling you, oh, front door. And the administration's kind of the smallest tucked back portion of that building. And so the curb appeal also talks to just as you see the building from the street, what kind of reaction do you have? Line of sight we talked about earlier. Learning space performance, again, was about the attributes of the classroom. Ease of wayfinding, even internally. I mean, we could look through kind of making red pod, green pod, blue pod, so you know where you are and try to go through things that way. But again, it's trying to treat an issue versus finding a way that it's not an issue in the first place. Logical site organization. That is what the efficient use of site changed to. And so, let's see. So this, the best way to describe this is that you've got a lot of activities happening in a lot of places versus like consolidated logical use of the site. So you have playgrounds all over, you have parking all over, you have access drives, you have fields intermittently, versus the replacement keeps most of the fields together, the consolidated use of the parking. It's just more of a logical site utilization. Let me scroll back up. Incorporate views. It's harder for the other one to incorporate views because currently it doesn't have windows and it would be costly to create those. We can, but it's just a taller road to climb. And then energy efficient. Again, we felt like this had a tougher road to climb than the replacement from an energy efficiency standpoint. And then ease of construction phasing. Ease of construction phasing is obviously different between the two of them based on the fact that we don't want to spend any extra money on modulars or anything to bring, or portables to bring in to house the kids for swing space and things like that.
In the space program, you'll notice that the existing facility, we have 950 square feet per classroom because of the acute angles and the inefficiency of the layout, versus the replacement school, we have 900 square foot classrooms. So there's some efficiencies in that also.
And then finally, number 40 was utility organization. Between the two, if you look at the replacement, you might as well visualize there's no utilities there because you're starting over. Whereas I would say that the utility organization currently is flirting with a hot mess. There's an easement going right through the center that would we talked to the civil and electrical engineer, and their thoughts are that that easement would have to remain, and then a lot of things would have to happen around that. And yeah, I guess I won't show you that diagram of the utilities, but that's why it's got a 0. Yeah. So that's where they started to separate a little bit the two options.
So you had just mentioned that that there's the classroom size. Is classroom size, enrollment that you use, is that also in this book?
Correct, and again, that's a draft form, but we used a student-teacher ratio relative to the district standards, and we have space programs that are identified relative to the type of programs going in that space.
Yeah, the program is actually in the appendix portion of the book, towards the end, and that'll have an itemized list of all the spaces and then what our guesstimate of what the square footages are that would need to accomplish that. And then that's what we're using right now as just a pin on the wall.
And how did those square footages compare? You mentioned a comparison to the existing Cherokee. How do those compare to our two newest schools, Hopi and Pima?
We're in the process right now of transforming that program into an actual floor plan. And you'll notice that that program is a net square footage. Then we use at the bottom line a 20% markup on that, and that is for all the support spaces, the corridors, the janitor's closets, the restrooms. And so what's transforming right now is a very efficient layout. We're kind of jumping ahead and working with that program. Our goal is to tighten up that 20% to 10% maybe, or less. And our goal seems to be coming forth as successful. So we're really not at the point where we can, go there, but we're moving
Yeah,
towards.
I didn't know at which point
Yeah.
that was discussed. Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to jump then to core, so thank you very much. The Hopi, there you said that there was a $1.5 million savings. Where was this savings for Hopi? And it's relevant to Cherokee because obviously when we went into and we approved Hopi, we didn't think that there would be a $1.5 million. So I'm wondering how we are relating that savings, so I'm interested in what specifically are, so that we can have a better estimate of the future GMP for Cherokee.
A few things on that, and Mike can chime in too, because Mike was also the pre-construction manager on both Hopi and Pima. So we made sure we kept that continuity together. So one, during the bid, we had 2 GMPs for Hopi. And so we did have a little bit higher contingency number on it, but there was owner contingency, there was contractor contingency, and then we had value engineering. Like one of the aspects that we came back with was changing the manufacture of the HVAC units. So working with Dennis and the facilities group, we did a whole study of this manufacturer that was spec'd versus 2 other ones. Are they competitive with each other as far as are they going to meet all your requirements that the facilities need? And we came down that one of them, Train, was, did meet all the requirements, but quite a bit savings. So that value engineering just rolled back into savings. So there are numerous items that even after getting the GMP set, we went back with the subcontractors from Dennis and worked on refining them farther through it. Because if you remember, both of those projects went pretty quick through some design aspects. And that put a lot of pressure on us getting pricing, so we left some of the contingencies in there, and we didn't have a lot of time to do the value engineering up front during the GMP, where we did it afterwards. So those numbers with the cost savings that we were able to put back and actually increased the contingency rather than lower it, which normally happens. That's where those dollar savings came from.
So in this particular project, do you anticipate that you will be doing the value-adding engineering up front, so that in essence we would not be expecting to see that much, over $1.3 million,
Yes,
$1.5 million
absolutely.
savings?
Right. Because we realize it's tough for you to budget than the next projects. You're figuring you spent basically $3 million on these 2 projects. It's a good thing it's going back into the budget, but it's hard to budget that when 2 years ago, a year and a half, you thought it was going to be spent. So yes, timing, working with Orcott Winslow up front is the one we want to make sure as tight as possible, and then we're really manage those dollars for you and you don't see those savings. We want to give you back money, but yes, it's hard for the district to budget with these kind of numbers coming back.
So I noticed there was about a $30 difference, square footage about the same between the 2 buildings. What was the difference in the 2 buildings?
Okay, you're going to have to really tax our memory now.
I mean, this one, Hopi had some underground stormwater storage tanks. There was quite a bit more utility work on this. The phasing was more complicated with all the earthwork moves.
We included, recall, we added the deceleration lane on Rubicon, so that was all the street work. I think it's basically $300,000 more just in adjacent ways money was spent. When we looked at square footage, that's the entire project, not just bond. So there's money there. There's a little more design element on Hopi than Pima. Some other site elements also that added to that.
So are you anticipating Cherokee to be more on the Pima $300 a square foot, or are you thinking Cherokee is going to be more in the $330 a square foot, given the site improvements that are out there?
Site-wise,
well, you have site, you have landscaping,
right.
You've got construction. I mean, but you've had an opportunity.
I would say
to
the
really look
site
at
would be
some.
comparable to Pima, because we only have 1 road we can improve on. That limits a lot of the design, and that's a lot of your parking issues you have there. But the rest is mainly a lot of the building costs. We couldn't tell you that until we see an actual elevation designs on that. But the site should be comparable. I don't think it'd be as expensive, hopefully, as Hopi unless we have to do a lot of underground retention.
Cherokee does have
storage.
quite a bit larger site, though. So,
That's true.
yeah.
More acreage.
More acreage.
So that makes it easier. Is that what you're
It
saying?
definitely, it helps in laydown, yes. We just have to make sure we're very good neighbors. 'Cause
It's a positive thing that there's more acreage to work
yes,
with.
as long as we can utilize it.
So then my next question, I'm going to move to the district. So we've heard, thank you very much for the feasibility study and your recommendation. Now, will we be hearing a recommendation from the Construction and Design Committee of the district and what they are recommending?
Yes, we will, on the 16th, we will come forward, it'll be an action item, and based on their recommendation, we will discuss, but I think we're pretty much in agreement at this point. The group that I mentioned that met is Mr. Gadd, Dr. Hagegat, Dennis Rayler, myself, and Tom O'Neill and Fatima have been in those meetings. But we'll meet to confer and make sure that we agree with that recommendation, and the action item will have a recommendation.
Great. You know, I have one more question. I have to apologize. Could I ask Cora to come back up? Because it was something I thought of when you were talking, and then I didn't write it down, and just it reminded me. Can you go to the slide that shows the 2% difference? And I'm going to go by what my memory was, and then I want you to tell me, you know, because I don't think I'm correct on this because I'm looking at this slide. But general conditions and contingencies have varied, but general conditions have typically been the same because they're based upon a percentage of the GMP. So I don't understand how you can add 1.3 for general contingencies under that item.
Because
and the same's kind of true for contingencies too.
No.
So that's why,
Yeah,
please
well,
explain that.
So
just so I can
on
understand it.
contingencies, like Mike mentioned before, it's a renovation. So when we cut into the buildings where it's a ceiling and we find out, right now, most of us replace, just peel the ceiling, or I'm sorry, the roof back and put new roofing down. But if you get into it, now you need a whole new deck. You don't know what the structure is without really getting into it. A new building, we know what it's going to be. So you would, renovations, it is standard to add more of a contingency line item for the unknowns unforeseen. That's why that line item's higher. Is that understandable? Or okay. On the general conditions, the reason that would be higher is because it's a longer duration. General conditions are really based on time, not money, on cost. Because if we have the same superintendent, project manager, assistant project manager trailer out there, that cost is the same every month. So if the renovations, we predict being longer, 4 to 6 months, depending on we see the final plans, and also how many phases we have. Is it 4 phases, 6 or 7? That time extension, you cannot base that on percentage because of that, because you're going to have more people out there spending those dollars for another 6 months. So if it's, in reality, it's basically they're almost identical pricing without those two numbers. But if you have someone out there 6 months for the same contract, that is not equitable to have it that way.
Okay, thank you. Then my last question, because this was brought up, that we were informed that the safest type of school in the current environment is the one-room schoolhouse. It's the safest and it's most energy efficient, and we've just built our 2 most recent schools that way. And here we're looking more at the garden style with individual buildings. Can you talk to the fact, and the architect probably
I'll let
needs
the
to,
architect
too,
on the safety aspect.
for the safety aspect as well as energy efficiency?
Absolutely. From an energy efficiency standpoint, there's probably some merit in having one single building and its efficiency. But our plan is first off, we want to respond to the community and what they desire in terms of a design. Our next step is going to be a sustainability workshop. That'll be looking at not only the energy efficiency, but daylight harvesting, energy conservation, water conservation, the whole package of items that we want to see as a benefit to that particular project. Working with CORE at the same time so that we're fiscally responsible. We're not bringing in some technology that's wildly expensive it has to have a return to the district. And then the security aspect of it, those are diagrams. Those diagrams will actually create a perimeter. Fencing and buildings will create that perimeter that keeps the students within the core of the campus. And so that could be addressed easily in the replacement versus the renovation, as Scott had mentioned, where we have all those doors that are in the perimeter and your hallways of the world.
So in reality, a garden style can be just as safe as the one-room classroom buildings. Is that what I'm
Correct.
hearing?
Correct.
Because it's really not that building, it's more the parameter, the fencing, and how the campus is designed. for
Correct,
safety.
exactly. Yep. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry. Go, yeah.
Board Member Perleberg.
To that point, I just want, because believe I heard you say that Cherokee has a lot more acreage,
Yes.
correct, than certainly, I mean, Pima had more than Hobie, but Cherokee has the most. So is that also possibly a kind of a consideration of, okay, we may have the room to make that a little more efficient as far as the multiple buildings? Is that consideration or no?
I think our two concepts are responding to what the community has said, this is where the buildings really want to fall. And that's a benefit to the cost in terms of we're concentrating where the existing buildings are in terms of regrading, new utilities coming in, and it'll be less of an impact financially in fixing up the fields and replacing the irrigation systems and such. So keeping that dynamic close to ground zero where the buildings exist has a real financial benefit, and that'll be seen in the GMP.
Okay, great. Well, I just wanted to say that, make sure it was said here how grateful the governing board is for all the work that's obviously been done these last 3 months. Orca, Winslow Corps, the Cherokee community as well. Obviously, you've all been working very hard for 3 months, and it's been quiet here for 3 months, which is a good thing. So if that's any indication, knock on wood, we're going to have a great process going forward, and a real happy community, I think, in the end, knock on wood.
Our team
So
really
thank you all
appreciates
for
that recognition, and I'd say from the community standpoint, from our team standpoint, we have a really solid foundation, and the results will show themselves in the future, and it'll be a nice glide path. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you.
I have a quick question. Don't sit down. I don't want you to keep getting up and down, up and down. Mr. O'Neill, I couldn't really tell from the footprints as I was comparing them. It's been asked of me to respond, and I wasn't quite sure yet. With the replacement proposal, do any of the structures go farther out into the field, or are they staying, are we getting closer to the neighbors?
I would say on the south, we're coming a little bit closer. It's necessary to do minimal phasing so we can get that, what we call swing space, new construction, so that they can pull out of the existing building. But we're transforming this program and this concept into a real plan, and it's compacting itself. And so what you see in this diagram, I would venture to guess, will be less impactful on the overall site once we get this project designed.
Do we have some of those neighbors on the visioning committee so they're kind of aware of okay, that's great.
We do have immediate neighbors on the visioning committee, and they've been wonderful. They've been very interactive, challenging, and that's what we wanted. We wanted them to be challenging us in that setting. It's been good.
Last question for Core. Regarding the replacement versus renovate. People are typically going to say, well, of course, it's a replacement, and Board Member Beckham asked some questions, and I got a few answers, and I'm not going to ask you to be specific, but when we replace, we're obviously doing 100% new, right? And when you're renovating, you're going to keep some of the previous, structure, etc. So maybe you're 100%, maybe you're 70% or 60% over here. So would you say, it's clearly obvious, but can you speak to a little bit that differential is labor and cost of being there, like you said, in duration, and what exactly drives that to be so much more?
Yeah, correct. Just like we stated before, a lot of it's the phasing, because we can do a replacement in 3 phases, whereas the renovation would take 6 phases. So we can only do like 2 classroom building pods at one time, and so to have contractors come into the site, do their job, leave, and then come back, and all of these mobilizations and the labor, as you state, does drive cost up, for sure.
And then you also have some of what Orcutt Winslow's and their consultants went through, complete plumbing replacement. That means even underground plumbing under the buildings for the restrooms. So instead of, if the building's demoed all the way, we dig a trench and go, we have to saw cut all the way through, very labor intensive, inside an existing building, then lay it, bring dirt back in, bring concrete in through the building, you know, and it just, that is a lot more labor
So
intensive.
it's more detailed labor
A lot more
as well?
detail. The demo, we talked, it costs more on the renovation, because what we anticipating with no windows is cutting through those concrete walls and have to shoring them up and everything, versus like Mike said, we can come in with heavy equipment and the building goes down real quick then, as opposed to all of the detailed, you know, demo that will have to go on. So it's more, like you said, little bites at a time that are going to take up time and money, because you're doing nothing but small work inside existing buildings.
All right, thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. Any further questions? Okay.
Madam President,
Hi.
permission to speak. Members of the governing board, Dr. Creekart, Sandra, Cabinet. I didn't want this day to go by without me having an opportunity to come up here and endorse these great companies. It's been such a pleasure to work with CORE and Orcutt Winslow. When Orcutt first came to meet the faculty and meet with the visioning committee, they said something that I've remembered. And it was, you know, whether it be high innovation, renovation, or replacement, we're going to draw it out of you. And they really have done that. They've been so collaborative. They've come to the campus many times. They've sat down and they've met with user groups. They've talked to the pre-K teachers. They've been in the Panda classrooms. They've watched the flow of the kids and how they interact with one another. They have taken a lot of time to take a look at what makes Cherokee special. And then the result of that was, I think, the recommendation that they're making today. So I completely endorse both of these organizations. And you know, you're not hearing anything from our community because they're happy. And we have very intelligent people in the Cherokee community. And these intelligent people are happy. They're not calling me. They're not emailing you and texting you and knocking on doors and calling the police and calling the newspapers. They're happy. So we're happy, and thank you guys for all the time that you've taken tonight to present, and we're hoping for the best next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we move on to information and discussion item 4B, bond planning projects. Dr. Creekard?
Thank you, President Beckman, members of the board. As we saw that chart of escalating construction costs that was presented, we need to continue to plan to move forward with the next project. So tonight, we're willing to answer questions about what will be our recommendation on the Tuesday night, which will be that you name Hohokam as the next bond project, followed closely by Kiva and Pueblo. And we believe that Hohokam has been at the top of the matrix the 2 times we did it. It is a site that Mr. Rayler has said will cost us, if we start school next year with students in it without doing without the plan for remodeling or rebuilding. It's going to cost us just in HVAC alone several $100,000 probably, because of the work that needs to be done there for the year. So that's what this is about. This is about you having questions. We answer the questions the best we can at this point, but we believe we need to start moving on the next projects, get them lined up, get them scheduled, and move into them as soon as possible. With the same type of planning, I don't know if it would require the same amount of time as Cherokee, 4 months of planning. We knew Cherokee going in was a much more complex building because of the concrete, because of the lack of access, so forth. With Hohokam, we want to go through the same community process of gathering the input of what they want, and and then move forward, but we believe we want to get that started as quickly as we can and name them and get into construction before the costs go even higher. So I believe naming the other two projects afterward to know, so just so those communities know they are on the list, they are planning, and as it fits into completion of Cherokee, completion of Navajo restoration, and then we start with the next one at a timely basis and plan it. There's always going to be some overlap as we can. Mr. Rayler has been working on what his optimum schedule. He has summer projects to be done this year, like front office remodels and several other more minor projects, but he needs to get those going. He has interviewed graduate students in the construction management program at ASU, and we've also have a lead on somebody as a project coordinator to help him with the projects, but he is lining out the timeline so that we can move forward as quickly as possible and take advantage of the time that we have and not let it slip by and cost us more. So our recommendation is going to be Hohokam followed by 2 other schools, and what those projects are, we're not proposing that we know what those communities want without asking them. And so we'll go through that same kind of process. Renovate, rebuild, do a feasibility study, move forward. And we will do that with all 3 of those. In the order that we propose is Hohokam now, and then looking at the other 2 schools to be next. We believe that to some degree they might be able to be done in a closer sequence to each other than the others, because I will say, I'll go out on a limb and say it would be very difficult for us to justify renovating Pueblo. Those buildings were built to be 10, 15 years usage, and it's been, what, 50, yeah. So, but at any rate, that's where we are, and Mr. Gadd and I are here. We've been talking quite a bit about this, and so we're willing to, as well as Dr. Hagegat has, as you know, has been meeting with the community. We've met with the staff of Hohokam and Yavapai. We've been transparent in saying if the board approves, then this is the plan, to let people know what we are doing. And our plan is, if you approve on Tuesday night, then we will, for the start of next school year, move the Hohokam staff and students to Yavapai campus to be combined with Yavapai, so that as soon as the planning is at the point where they can start construction, we can start construction and not have to wait till a winter break or a summer break to start the construction. It's much more difficult on that campus to phase because it's not as large as the Cherokee campus, and the conditions of the buildings, we think. But at any rate, we would do that. And there is the principals are putting together a planning team to talk about how they mix people in. We would be saving a little bit of staff. We think 3 teaching positions, so it's not a lot as they combine, but other administrative costs we would be saving during that time. And then we will continue to monitor Yavapai's growth plan and take a look again in November if they've met their target goals. And if so, then the following November, before we decide what happens to Yavapai when the new Hohokam is ready. That's our plan right now that we have been talking to the community about. Dr. Hagegat had 2 meetings, a daytime and an evening meeting with each school, so a total of 4 meetings, and answered their questions. Personally, I've not gotten emails saying never answered this question or never dealt with this. So I think those went pretty well. The communities understand what we will do if in fact you vote to choose Hohokam as the next bond project.
Any questions? Board Member Kravitz.
Do you have the matrix here, just to refresh people's memory of what it was, or
I
can we
have them
have it
back
at
in
the
my,
16th?
I have them in my office,
Can we
I'm sorry.
have that on the 16th?
Yeah.
And also, you mentioned that Mr. Railer has identified a possible project coordinator. Do you know when we might have some concrete as to whether that comes to fruition?
Mr. Railer has been out because of a death.
Right, that I know.
And so we've not been in touch with him to see if that person whose name we were given has actually agreed to submit an application. So I don't know exactly where that is,
okay.
but we'll find out. But that was in itself, because we had no names.
Right, that's why I'm asking,
Was
because
noteworthy, yeah.
that's a positive development, that if we know anything by the 16th, that would be great too.
Board Member Greenberg.
Just to clarify, the move from Hohokam to Yavapai is not a indication of what will happen once Hohokam is finished rebuilt, what will happen to Yavapai.
The growth plan and the target goals are the indicators of what will happen. If they reach their target goals, I would love, and I told this to Seth, I would love to have 2 schools of 600 kids down there in those 2 sites. But honestly, the trend has not been positive for Yavapai. So there's not been an uptick of enrollments. They had 0 open enrollees requests this year. Is that right, Mr. Ardon?
I wish I could tell you exactly. I don't know. Maybe a few.
Oh, okay. So, but we're looking at, we will continue to monitor that. Even though the 2 schools will be together, we are committed to keeping the enrollment figures by attendance area so that we know if which one's growing rather than guessing. So we will do that. We can do that internally.
Okay.
Board Member Beckham.
Would you, along with any information on support for the construction that Board Member Kravitz asked, could you also provide us the estimated timeline for those three next projects? So there's been some, chatter, just does this possibly mean that Hohokam will actually start the rebuild process or renovate process prior to January, which would be prior to Cherokee? So to be able to have a timeline to see if that's possible, or if it's given the timeline, that's not even possible, to give some people on the public an idea of what it actually looks like. And with that, would you include what the approvals you need from the governing board and what those timelines look like? Because I know you can't start on anything until you get certain approvals.
Right. And we would follow the standard procedure at each step for who is hired for each phase, and of course then whether it's renovate or rebuild, as we're doing now for Cherokee, we would ask for a vote at that time, come for your approval at that, and then when we have the actual GMP, so that we know
We just want to see that in a timeline
Right.
for all those 3 schools, so that we will have some idea of what we're actually
Sure.
looking at.
The reopen enrollment as of 4/1.
3.
I have
Good.
one if
Okay,
you,
no,
and
come
then
in,
you'll
Board
tell
Member
me.
Milburn.
Thank you. So yeah, I agree that seeing a timeline of how Cherokee and Hohokam together will flow. Also, might be helpful Tuesday to have somewhat of an estimate of the, I'm sure, at least the time that will be saved by having what I'm assuming, time will be saved when you have an empty campus to work from on Hohokam, and the benefit of that on that timeline of Hohokam. I'm just making that assumption that it's got to be helpful to not have to work around students. So maybe just an idea of that for our meeting on Tuesday, so the community understands, that benefit. Also, do we know the estimated enrollment of the combined schools in August, what that will be?
Right at 700.
Yeah, just forecast.
Right at 700?
Yep.
We're looking at about
Good number for schools.
Yeah. So not only the time estimate, but the one that's harder to quantify is the disruption of education when the students are there, or disruption of the construction.
Right.
Because of the students, and
Right.
that's harder to
Right.
quantify, but it is an issue that probably contributes to time that would be saved.
It's a benefit, yeah.
It depends on whether you count preschool or not in those
Okay.
numbers. If you don't count preschool, it's down around 600 with both schools.
Oh, with both schools it's 600, and with preschool
So-
it's around 700.
Yeah, the preschools, remember both at Yavapai and Holcomb, they currently have preschools that were originally at Navajo.
Oh,
And
yes.
those people,
Oh,
and those
yes,
people
yeah.
have asked to go
Yes.
back to Navajo when they want to be part of that campus when that is restored. So their current preschool numbers would be diminished by those at least.
And I would add, just finally, as we do discuss timelines, and Cherokee Holcomb, moving forward, that's great. Then we're going to turn our sights on the Saguaro complex. I think obviously we need to put in that time frame time to discuss enrollment and enrollment projections, and where things that now have, since our last conversations about those things, we need to make sure that that's in that timeline as well before we really dive into Pueblo and Kiva.
Well,
Can I follow
Sure.
up on that?
Sure.
Because that's what I was going to say is too, even for Hohokam. What are you anticipating the school to be built at? How much, that capacity? And then what is the programming at each school? Because as we've learned, programming is very different from capacity. And so I'd like to have both those numbers for all of the schools.
I
What's
don't know if we can
anticipated.
get all that done by Tuesday, especially with Mr. Raylor not here. So it's going to have to be, the due date on some of that's going to have to be later than Tuesday probably.
But we kind of need that information to be able to make a decision.
You can only get so much
Well,
at a time.
Well, I'm not sure as far as Holcomb being the next rebuild, I don't know if
It's what
that
happens when it
information-
returns,
That's
yeah.
more a question of what will happen when Holcomb is done, or at least, it's at
it's
least a
all
question, it's at
anticipated
least a
numbers.
question before we design Holcomb.
But you're approving
That you
something.
want to say.
You're approving something, and if you're anticipated is 300 students, and you're designing it for 600-700, you've got a lot of growth here, and does that make sense? And that is part of the decision that we're making.
But I think that's
So-
why we have Yavapai in the conversation, so that we're not talking
But
about
that's my
buildings
point, we
for
have to be
300.
very transparent about what we are talking about, and that's why that information is so relevant to a decision.
We have projections
I imagine.
from the democracy. We have projections we can give for a whole town.
Ongoing conversations, I'm sure.
So my question is, and you all have brought it up, from Board Member Kravitz asking for that matrix. As we discuss enrollment going forward, and I don't even necessarily know if it would be next meeting or regarding the next projects, I think we need to pay some special attention to the programming at the schools, because we have movable programs. And some of these decisions have been made in the past based on enrollment numbers with programs in there that weren't necessarily organic to the original school. For instance, right now we just talked about Navajo's, preschools being moved. You would just look at that number at Navajo right now and say that's their enrollment. And there certainly are other programs that don't necessarily have to be on that campus, but we're placed there, and that's why the parents attend. So while it's a big discussion, it needs to be thought about. You know, why is that particular program there, and is it necessarily at that school, or did we put it there? And as we base these decisions on whether a school is to be rebuilt or not, consider that.
So for example, at Cherokee, we were looking at cutting down the overall square footage as a way of cutting down the overall cost. And so wait a minute, we have Panda preschools at Cherokee now because there was room. We have Panda preschools, which is, for people who might not know, which are special ed preschools. One in each learning complex is the reason for that. Well, we have room in other schools in the Chaparral learning community to move the Panda. So if there's space available, why would we pay money to build space for a program just because it happens to be at Cherokee now and can easily be moved up the street? So that's an example of the programming that can be moved and save money in the long run, and still provide the space and the program that those kids deserve. So do that.
And then hopefully when Dennis returns, or whoever can speak to it, you know, I've received a few emails here or there talking about Yavapai and the concern for Yavapai, and you mentioned it, and I appreciate that, regarding their enrollment growth plan. I know that is a lofty goal, but it's something that was genuine when it was put out there. So to keep track of that enrollment and give them support as needed to make sure that we follow up with that genuine, discussion regarding putting them on an enrollment growth plan, even though it is lofty. I would like to touch on that. Any further discussion or questions? Okay. We move into information discussion item 4C, proposed revisions to the governing board policy CFD. Ms. Marshall?
There's people back there touching it. I don't want to. Okay, my turn. Good afternoon, Madam President, members of the board, cabinet, Dr. Sandra. It's late for me. It's been a long day. It's been a long week. Dr. Creekard, Sandra, Dr. Sandra, good to see you all. I have for a first read for you this afternoon, policy CFD, subtitled School Councils, commonly known as Site Council here in the district. This proposed revision is based on a comparison of our policies to the ASBA models, and you'll see the blue language is an addition, and this language would bring our policy in line with the ASBA model as well as with the statute ARS 15351 with respect to the makeup of site councils. When I was reviewing this earlier today with Dr. Creekard, he caught a typo that I will point out to you. So this isn't in your board book version. One of the membership criteria is one student if the school is a high school, which makes more sense than if it is not. And that is what the statute says. So thank you for that, Dr. Creekard. I will take any discussion or questions at this time.
Board Member Greenberg.
When you emailed us about this, you noted that a board member requested this change?
No, I did not. If I did, that was a mistake. It was not requested by a board member. What I emailed you was that I had spoken, what I meant was I had spoken with a board member who said, oh, I didn't know you were working on that policy. Could you send it to everybody as soon as possible? So I sent it maybe a day before Sandra normally sends the board materials.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Board Member Kravitz.
So this is an update per ASBA,
Yes.
but then you mentioned something about in line with Arizona state statute?
Yes.
So,
The statute has not changed. As you know, many of our policies need some work. This is one of those policies that hasn't been updated. I don't know if we even have the original date on this one. But we did a review several years ago comparing our policies to the ASBA models, and this is one that needed to be updated and was in line to be updated.
so the membership comes from state statute?
Yes.
That whole thing, okay. So then my question is, hold on, I have a couple, hold on. Okay. One, it says one community member if the school is a high school, or two community members if the school is not a high school. See, the way I think of things is I would flip it, because a high school is a bigger school. So I would think it would be two community members if it's a high school. Let's see, and one for an elementary or a K-8. Can we, I mean,
So
what is the thought
So
process behind
this-
that? Because I'm not,
you're asking what is the thought process of the legislators who came up with that?
well,
But
I guess I am.
But I think I can clarify. If you'll look at the top line under membership, it talks about what the site council shall initially be composed of. That is what the statute prescribes when you first start a site council. And the only requirement after that is to have that representation, however the site council decides they want to have it, but that it should take into consideration the ethnic composition of the local community, and that the number of parents and teachers should be the same. So it could be more, it can be less. It's very flexible.
okay, yeah, so if you
And the
wanna-
site council makes those decisions.
And except that the combination of teachers and parents
Should be the
have to
same.
make up a majority
Yeah.
of the site council.
Right.
Regardless of how many people are on it,
And the principal serves as chairman.
for the first year. Unless later they get, the site council elect someone else.
Votes them off the island.
Yeah.
And then it says something about one student if the school is not a high school, so there are no students on the site council. Did I miss that, if it is a high
So
school?
that was the change that I was pointing out. It's actually one student if it is a high school, which makes sense.
Oh, sorry,
Our older
okay, thank you.
students
Okay.
are better able to participate in a meaningful way in a site council.
Okay, and then the words, hold on, where is it there? It says, let's see, the school council shall provide input for the creation of curricular and instructional strategies, enrichment, that meet the shared vision for curricular instructional strategies, enrichment. Does enrichment mean supplemental materials?
I'm not sure where you are.
Oh, I'm in the body, in the,
Above
let's see,
membership.
Above membership. 1, 2, third
This one?
paragraph down. Well, it's also, enrichment is mentioned second and third paragraphs,
Okay.
and fourth. They keep using those terms. Does that include supplementals? Because we've had some questions by community members about improving supplemental materials. So does that encompass that as well?
Under the first statement, the governing board may delegate to a school.
Right, and that's another question,
they-
because when
I
I read
suppose-
the
I suppose
ARS,
it-
it said may, and I thought, well,
So the governing board could,
that may work for a small district, but for a large
Right.
district, okay.
right, I could see a small rural district
Yeah.
wanting to they have one high school in the district.
And they get
they'd
to-
like the site council
Right.
to develop the high school, to do the math adoption for the high school,
Right.
and so forth, rather than have it be a district function where they don't have very many people. And you saw what it takes here for a math adoption for the whole district. So it doesn't make sense for a site council, and having 29 different math curricula, and so forth. But, so that's in May, and I would say instructional strategy / enrichment. So that would be, if they were given that right, they could determine what kind of teaching practices would be stressed at the school. One school may say we want all cooperative learning, another school says no, we want traditional seats in a row and teacher-led instruction. Again, depending on the community and the size of the school district, that might make more sense for some than I believe it does when we have a large ed services department who studies these issues, comes to the board, the governing board, if we're going to change a school to a traditional school, for example. That's your decision, with input from the community, but not the site council's decision necessarily.
Right, but I guess my question more had to do with supplementals,
Yeah.
and maybe this doesn't deal with that issue.
Neither the statute, well, the statute doesn't use the word enrichment.
Oh.
I'm not sure where that language must have come from ASBA. So I'm not sure what was meant by that. The statute talks about the governing board may delegate to a school council the responsibility to develop a curriculum.
Right, that I
And
agree, that may, I guess.
And talks about.
I'll look at the statute and then I'll ask you.
Sure.
some
It does
specific
not
questions.
refer to enrichment, so I'm not sure where that
Okay.
comes from.
I mean, yeah, they're using two different terms. I don't know if
Yeah.
they're talking about the same thing or not, but I'll look at it and
Okay.
ask you.
Board Member Greenberg.
Just to clarify Board Member Kravitz's point, are you saying that the recommendation from ASBA are these prescribed 3 parents or guardians, 3 teachers, 1 non-certified employee? Because I don't see that in the statute.
The entire policy is ASBA's recommendation. We had the part in black exactly as ASBA has it. We did not have the part in blue, which ASBA has, and let me take a look at.
So just to clarify, my understanding, Ms. Board Member Kravitz, is that this is at the blue language of the actual number of individuals on those committees is ASBA's recommendation, but I don't see that in the statute, because what the statute says is the governing board shall determine the initial number of school council members. Thereafter, the school council shall determine the number. So I think this is ASBA's recommendation of what they believe to be an appropriate starting point.
And we did have Dr. Sakos and Dr. Hagigat talk with the principals about how it works at each of their schools, and I don't know if they had any comment on the numbers in the membership, Dr. Sakos. I think we talked more about compliance with open meeting law than anything else under this, but.
What they did talk about is a lot of the site council procedures that are in place were established several years ago, and may have slightly changed from the initial recommendation that was there. So I can't, it's no longer on my screen because it's off. So can you point out the language it shows where they?
The membership?
Yeah, where it's
They're
the
just
initial. And each site
This is
shared
all
with
added,
us.
so there was no initial in our policy.
Right.
No, but I believe that's what's in statute, though.
It is.
Yeah, it's that initial, and so what they shared is
Where in the statute, not according to the references we cite, unless if I have an old
Board
version.
Member Beckham.
I need to.
So I think we're getting, this, just so everybody knows, this is not a simple, let's just add some membership here.
No.
What it really is, and I think what we need to step back and look at is really look at the whole policy. I think by just coming in and adding a few words does not, as I read it, it doesn't meet the intention or compliance with the actual statute.
In what way?
So, I'll read it to you. So the statute, just a second. And this is where I need to get some guidance on it. It says in its statute 15.3.51. The purpose of this section is to ensure that individuals who are affected by the outcome of a decision of the school site share in the decision-making process. Okay, and what, from reading on, that is talking about this decentralization. It's so that the community, that parents will have some input into what happens and at that site, right? So this is what it says. It says each school shall establish a school council. So every single one of our schools should have a school council. I believe we call ours site councils. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or-
Yes.
Okay. It says the governing board may delegate to a school council the responsibility to develop a curriculum and may delegate any additional powers that are reasonably necessary to accomplish, and this is the big word, decentralization. So I would like to know what the definition of decentralization is, because that is the intent of this statute. And I want to make sure that our policy is meeting the intent.
Okay, so here's a little history lesson. So back in the mid to late 80s, there was a movement around the country that hit school districts called site-based management, which was about decentralization. It went so far in some districts of a district telling a school, here is your entire budget, including what you pay for staff, what you pay for food services, what you pay for transportation. Here's your budget. We give you that. You decide how you want to do that. Then you contract with nutrition services. You contract independently with transportation, but you make all of those decisions, and then show us your results at the end. Two, what we were doing in Scottsdale at that time is training schools on having councils like these, where parents were involved and teachers were involved and classified members were involved, to make decisions about what we now call the SIPs at the schools, so the improvement plans, where they want to go. So we talked about some instructional strategies. We did not talk about the curriculum, that was still district-wide. And then we talked about certain elements at the school. Are we going to bell schedule? We actually, in this district, had schools propose calendars to the governing board, and we had separate calendars. And we had two schools on two separate calendars at the school itself, Sequoia and Hopi. So there was a whole movement towards decentralization as things became too much top-down. The purpose of what we were doing, which then led into this, and some of these words are things that I was a trainer in the district, and we would go around to schools training staff on these concepts of decentralization and having input. Some teachers objected because they said, wait a minute, that's the principal's job. I don't want to be bothered with that. I got enough to do. But most people said, this is great. Parents said, yes, I want to be more involved than having fundraisers. I want to be involved in making decisions at the school. It was the site council reps who were most often then invited to interview, whether they had an assistant principal position or maybe even a teacher position, and sometimes the principal's position. So they did have real input to what was going on in the school. And so the decentralization at that time was to change the whole top-down kind of structure that we had. Now, because of site councils, there's less of a call for that because people have a voice. They have a chance to participate in decisions that affect the whole school. So that's kind of where we were from the 80s to now. I would guess that decentralization and site-based management is something that is not talked about so much in the last 15 years, at least, in schools anymore, but that was a national movement at the time, and that's where that kind of came from.
So what we did, excuse me. So what we have is we have it in state statute, and we're asked to have site councils, or school councils.
It's still a good thing.
And it's still a good thing. And we have 29 schools, and they all have a site council, and it's my understanding, the schools that my children attended to, because I was part of it, was each one of those schools has site council bylaws. And those bylaws then set the parameters for what the site council does, who the membership is, And so our policy, I believe, when what we're stating is we need to also have somebody designated in it who oversees those site council to make sure those bylaws are in compliance and current.
I don't
The other issue that I think is important, it says we may, you know, at some point in time, I don't know if this district did say, hey, site councils, you do get to determine whether it's instruction, enrichment, or I don't know that it ever did curriculum, but maybe it did, or it did SIPs.
Yeah, not to my knowledge.
What it did. We need to find out if we did do that, or are we choosing not to do it? Because there's confusion out there by what state statute says, and then a very broad, without any minutes or backup to say what what a governing board chose to do. So we might need to shore up what decisions have been made. So if we have not given site councils curriculum, is there something wrong with stating that we haven't given them curriculum, but this is what we have approved to be in site councils? I don't know if that's important, but I know that so Dr. Creekard, when you were wrong, this site council's come up several times in the last 10 years. And there were many issues with it. And I know that 5 years ago, Jeff Thomas, I believe he was in HR, he had a whole project which was to oversee site councils. He was going to retrain, he was going to revamp, and then it kind of just kind of went away at some point. And when I asked, well, whatever happened, there's nothing documented what actually happened with all that. So there's been confusion over the last 10 years. I think that when we're looking at this policy, my point is it's not just adding a few words, a few additional words as membership. I think we should look at the whole policy so that it's not confusing to people and that we're very straightforward on what this district is expecting out of its site councils.
So, I don't know when the site council started doing bylaws. They did not have bylaws when I was a principal, nor was there ever, they never were given the ability to do curriculum. You're correct on that. Both Dr. Nance and I, both having been principals in this district for a while, neither one of us can ever remember a time when curriculum was, so that was, that's true. I didn't mean to say that site councils has not been an issue, because there's always discussion about site councils and whether schools are doing it right or not. Decentralization has not been a major issue. It's been more that you have this in place. We're supposed to have these abilities to sit and talk about what's going on in the school and have these certain responsibilities at the school level, but it's not being operated. You're not meeting, you don't have the right membership, you're not posting your meetings. Those kinds of things have been coming up for some time. I recognize that. And the assistant superintendents for secondary and elementary ed monitor that at their schools as part of their monitoring and supervising of those principals. Because this came to us this year as an issue and we talked about it, we trained the principals again, and some principals were new to this state and did not know about that statute. And so there has been a change in how they conduct business about site councils now that they know. In some cases, over time when it wasn't being monitored, things slacked off, and so now we've shored that up. And that is something that both Drs. Hagegat and Sakos are working with principals on to make sure that they're doing it right. So we do have people who do monitor this.
So can I ask, have you read all the bylaws of the schools?
I was just going to share with you, we actually made a spreadsheet that shares when they meet and that they're posting their websites. They have submitted, those that have the bylaws have submitted, those that didn't were working with their school councils. And so they're very aware that it's something that we need to be doing ongoing so that we are meeting the letter of the intent of the law. And so we have, I have looked at them. I know that Dr. Sackos has done the same, and so we created an entire spreadsheet that we share so that we're able to see how many parents and what's the ratio, and we continue to coach our principals to make sure, and I would say for the most part, they're really doing a really nice job having that parent voice, which ultimately as a site principal, that's very important for the school to have, you know, being in the principalship for a while. I would go out and recruit because there were times where parents just didn't understand what the school council was, so we were able to educate and then bring that. And so our schools are really looking into how they can refine some of these areas if they need to. Otherwise, they're continuing to do what they know how to do to get that parent input within school council.
Well, and I really appreciate that, because this is something that was a problem, and I'm glad to see that there's a focus on it. I do still go back to it at any point in time. You might not be here, and we did go through a period when our site councils were not doing what they were supposed to do. There was an accountability. So I would like to see something in our policy that talks about accountability, because then it gives, you know, the part of the problem is if there's no policy or whatnot and it's something that should be being done, it just tends not to, unfortunately, I think it's just maybe human nature, not to be the focus. So I would like something in the policy that talks more about what is the expectations are.
And just for clarification, specific to membership, I was recalling the last paragraph toward the end there, Michelle. You added specificity, or there you go, the last paragraph that says, initially, each of the school council members shall be selected in the manner and procedure by statute. The statute goes through the list of the different constituent groups, and then it goes on to say there must be an equal number of teachers and parents, guardians. That's where the principals have verified that initially when their site councils were established years ago, that's what they ensured, and that's something that EB and I, Dr. Hargigot, collected all of their information to make sure that there is that balance. So that's that number piece that I was speaking about. It wasn't with the specificity that is suggested in this this red line version.
Well, Board Member Greenberg.
Sorry. Just to that point, my only point was Board Member Kravitz had asked, or she had questioned whether establishing one community member if the school is a high school, or two community members if the school is not a high school. I was just pointing out that Board Member Kravitz is able to request that be changed if she wants, because it's just not, it's not in statute. That was my only point.
It's not required.
Right, right. That's all I was saying, is if you would like to recommend that change, you are legally able to do so.
So regarding bylaws, thank you, Dr. Sackos, for pointing this paragraph out again. It says the school council shall then adopt written guidelines. So that could be construed different than bylaws, but we're calling them bylaws, but written guidelines, and I think that's part of the confusion. Bylaws, according to parliamentary procedures, have different structures and requirements in them as to how they are changed and all of that, but then written guidelines would be. So we'll make sure that everybody has, if this language stays in place, that everybody has written guidelines, because that's, if this goes in, that's policy. That's explicit enough. It's policy, written guidelines they will have.
Well, I'm just speaking from experience. I know the schools that my children went to, that they did have it, and it was biased, because we actually, as a site council, we rewrote them, and that was part of the problem that came up. And I mentioned that to you, that we just needed to make sure some of them, well, one in particular, and I'm hoping that it had been changed, rewrote the bylaws so that its really only duty is to look at and approve tax credit funds. And that was not the intent of
No.
the
not at all.
statute. And so it was out of compliance, and we could not convince the administration of that. So I just want to make sure that there's not other schools that, or that particular school still has that
Can
in
I
their
just ask, when
bylaws.
you say they were out of compliance, what do you mean they were out of compliance? Because they have the ability to rewrite their guidelines as a council.
According to state statute, which the
Right.
intent was for decentralization,
Right.
for site-based management, so that parents would have input.
Right.
To only have input on whether or not a tax credit funds could be used for a playground or for a tutor, and you couldn't talk about anything else, I don't think was meeting the intent of the statute.
You believe they wrote it at the time to
they
exclude
did.
discussion of
Yeah.
anything other than
Yes.
tax credit? Okay. Thank you.
Board Member Greenberg?
I mean, if the site council itself chooses to limit what it works on, isn't that the entire, I mean, they can choose to do as much as we permit or less. I mean, maybe there are just certain communities that are, very busy, they don't have time to always, I mean,
I can tell you it was not based upon that. It
yeah, but I'm
wasn't
just
based
saying,
upon
I mean,
that.
certainly it's a vote of the council to amend the bylaws,
It
is it
sounds
not?
like the school administrator did not know what the intent of the site council was.
That's what
Because
I
I've
think
been on site
probably was
councils,
true.
we also set the site, help set the
Yes.
goals for the site improvement
Improvement plan
plan,
and
in
things
addition
like
to
that.
tax
Yeah.
credit
No, I agree.
and some other things as well.
And they certainly did add to the tax statute specifically that site council gets to decide what happens to funds that haven't been allocated in gifts.
Right.
And I'm hoping all that's changed, and it's not in existence still, but because we're looking at this, I just want to make sure.
Any further questions or discussion?
Is there anything you want to receive before we bring this back on consent?
Board Member Becker?
Or does it need to be further discussion?
I think it should not be on consent because
Okay.
we don't know what it's going to look like. So I assume, unless, do we need to?
So the feedback that I have is, I thought Dr. Creekard resolved the accountability expectation question when he talked about guidelines. Was there actual other language that you are looking to see in this policy when I bring it back?
Yes, there is, than just that was given. So why don't we talk about it afterwards and we can see
Okay.
if it is relevant or not.
Okay. Is any other, I guess I'm just looking for other board member feedback. I can talk to anybody offline, but.
Board Member Greenberg?
I mean, perhaps to Board Member Beckman's point, just to reiterate what I think you were asking for was a more clarity on the delegated not responsibilities, but delegated powers that we are conferring on these site councils should they choose to wish to engage in them, I think was the.
That, and also, I think, too, in the very first part, I think that, when we say we may have delegated the responsibility of curriculum, I mean, that is our policy. So should, it makes it sound, and I can see how people would say, well, how are we going to know that they delegated this or not? So do we, that's what I need to work out. I mean, to me, it's very confusing. Are we going to actually make an action item and delegate curriculum or not delegate curriculum? Is that just a discussion that happens just on a whim? Or how do site councils know if we've delegated the curriculum or not?
The board would take action.
I don't know if at some point this school board did delegate it.
I have found
Not
no
everybody's-
evidence that there was a
there wasn't,
delegation by
right.
the board.
So
This statute was enacted in 1994. Our electronic records don't go back that far, but what I found in our electronic records, I don't see anything. And then talking to people who were here, like Dr. Crinkard and Dr. Nance, they don't recall that. So I don't have any evidence that any board of this district ever delegated specific powers to the site council.
I do see her point.
So the next thing is, and may delegate any additional powers. How is anybody going to know what additional powers have been delegated to? Where do they find those? Maybe it's something
the board would have to act.
Right, but where, if you are a site council, where do you go to find that information?
So I would say that comes from the training that we do with principals. This is the role of site council. These specifically called for in statute is the unused, unallocated tax credit money. Here are other areas that are allowed. Input on the school improvement plan, the SIP.
So let's just, where is a principal going to find that? If it's not here, is it a regulation afterwards that names what those are, if you want to keep the policy really broad? So it just doesn't get lost again. There were 10 years there that no one knew, no one could, answer. Every school did something a little different. So I just want to get clarification so that, and I don't know if it may not be in policy, it may be a regulation of the policy to talk about what you just said. What additional powers have been delegated by this
Does the board have interest in discussing and adding some language about specific powers you want to delegate in this policy or in a regulation? Or alternatively, do you want to see language that talks about site-based management, decentralization, and we are leaving it to our sites, to our site councils, to decide what the topics will be that they will cover? I mean, those are kind of two broad ideas.
Board Member Greenberg.
Well, I think it's, if based on what you were asking for, if it were my position on it, you would want to set out perhaps the specific areas, these topics that we train our principals on what they can cover, what they may cover, that we're authorizing them that they can cover. And if they choose by their own guidelines to decide, we're only really going to focus on the administration of money, we think the administration is better placed to discuss, curriculum insight or something, then they can do that. I don't see why they can't. I don't see why a body can't limit itself in how it uses that. We're just saying we're giving you the authority to discuss these items.
And those items change.
Right.
So based on the leadership of the district too, as to I might say all of a sudden I want everybody to do such and such. This is an important thing to me, and the board agrees, so you don't have a choice in that matter. Another superintendent comes along and says, this could be done differently at different schools if we give them the power to do it differently. So let them decide that. So I worry about putting a list of what things they can do, and then adding to that list next year, and then the next year we'll adding more things, and pretty soon you have a long document, and people, it's like the tax codes, and then people start finding loopholes. The more specific you get, the more, to me, more problems you have with people beginning to find a loophole there or a loophole here, as opposed to saying, this broad, this is site-based management. You decide what things you want to deal with. And if they have a question, they have two people to talk to. Oh, we want to adopt our own math curriculum. No, I'm sorry, that is not something. When we study the impact the district office has on student achievement, the district office people in Marzano from McCrell said there are two important things that districts do that make an impact on student achievement. One is they have non-negotiable instructional goals. All right, so this says, well, you could have instruction, but instructional goals. Well, that's our curriculum maps, that's the state standards, those are non-negotiables. You will teach these things. But then schools have defined autonomy. So there is a definition, to your point, of what that autonomy is, and so that is important. I worry about that definition being too broad, because that doesn't really help the schools. So, so I think that's something that we can probably work on with the schools and say, here's our defined autonomy, and that you have these general areas of school management at your school that are unique to your school, but not, you can't change bus schedules, you can't change menus.
So, and I understand what you're saying, because if you, and I understand what you were saying, Dr. Creekard, but if I was, someone that I just got on the site council at a school, and I'm all excited because it says that the, governing board may delegate, responsibility to develop a curriculum, and there's people on there from 3 years ago, and they say, yeah, they let us do this, and so I'm like, great, let's move forward. And then how are we to know that that's no longer allowed or deemed appropriate? I mean, where is it? Is it and say it's a new principal? I mean, are we developing something so that principals, and I hear what you're saying, that you're going to speak to the principals about what is allowable, what is not allowable regarding their site councils. So how do we keep that consistent?
Yeah. May I comment?
Board Member Beckman, I see that as part of Dr. Hagiat and I's role.
Okay.
So at the beginning of each year, there's always a number of basic training topics that we do that, whether it's, bullying or, McKinney-Vento, Section 504. And with this being on our radar, I think that's an area, as Dr. Hagiat and I, it has been a long week, continue to work with our campuses and spot check what they're doing. And we do these types of revision. We then, in collaboration with Ms. Marshall, do the all principal training, but then when we do our follow-up meetings with our principals, and that's part of evaluation as well, is ensuring that we're on board. And I think that one of my takeaways here today is that, is reminding our principals that they should have a binder that has all of the information available for anybody to come in and look at it. So our current board policy, their operating principles, bylaws, guidelines, whatever we want to call it, agendas, they should have that at all times.
And that's my point, is that there's some sort of reference for, beforehand, where we were and where we are now, just so there's some consistency.
Yeah.
Board Member Kravitz?
I was just going to say, is there some basic document, I don't mean to suggest we need to create a long booklet, but what a basic document outlining what our district says are the opportunities and for a site council on what their basic responsibilities are. I mean, I remember years ago when there were so many questions about, well, what can we do with our tax credit money? The CFO at the time, Bob Flash, he had a big, he had a presentation for schools, for parents. This is what you can, your school can use tax credit money for. I think something like that, so when you're serving on a site council, you can, the principal can hand them, this is the basic guidelines for site council in our district. Yeah. So that there's no question, it can include the ARSs that are germane to site councils. Most parents don't even realize there are ARSs that they can look this up for. So just a basic guideline so that everybody's on the same page.
So, and to Board Beckham's point, I dug through my files too, and we did discover that Dr. Thomas did in January of 2013 that presentation, and so we've pulled that out and looked at, once we have this done, how are we going to roll that out? And I'll just give you an example. This is much like our emergency response plans. We had for a while there a big hype in the state to ensure, compliance and that there were certain pieces in place. Mr. Dorr came up with that template. Progress monitored the sites along the way, continues to provide reminders and training, and that's what I see we have to do with site council as well.
Yeah. And so you've convinced me. I think it does make sense for us to have a more general statement of these are the general areas in which you can. Yeah. We can do that. So this won't come back on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Because we'll be getting timelines for the construction.
As I say, it doesn't need to come back on Tuesday. There's no
Right.
sense of urgency.
That's right.
So
That's right.
it's not
Sure.
like, oh,
Yeah.
gee, so we can really kind of work
Yeah,
on it.
absolutely.
And figure it out.
Board Member Greenberg.
Yeah, my only point on that was, the flexibility issue of putting it in and then having to update it all, I don't know if it's just as an idea, I don't know if it makes more sense to say, the superintendent or the administration shall, issue general guidelines, and that way you can do it on your own. And that doesn't, you don't have to keep coming to us and saying, hey, last year we said, I wanted the site councils to do this, but it didn't really work, and now I want them to do this, can we change the language? Maybe that would be more one option for dealing with it.
Right.
Well, I think that's what needs to be explored. What is the best for this district, given what, concerns and issues maybe we've had in the past, so that they don't rise up again, and what is best given, the new statutes, and what then is practical practice given administration and time. So I just think it needs to be
Board
really
Member
explored.
Perliberg.
I'll add a little to that and maybe hopefully kind of close it out here with that thought, because taking another look at this through a newer lens than the mid-'80s, which I appreciate that. Appreciate the history, but at the same time, pendulums swing. And I would argue, as being board member for 6 years, and some of us being involved in the district for 10, that there has been a lot of talk of site-based leadership, especially now through the lens of competition. And when our campuses now have to somewhat really create an identity, possibly create programs that draw enrollment unlike ever before, for us as board to really look at is those conversations and dialogues on a campus of what do we want to be in this competitive market, is that the right place for site council dialogue, or is it not? So I would.
And we've had those discussions in the last month.
I know we've had them for a few years now, and that, because that has been a push, and a lot of, and every time a school is kind of targeted for, low enrollment or whatever, all of a sudden it comes into how are we having these dialogues on campus. So I would very much jump on that bandwagon. Let's take a whole new lens of what is really best practice for these roles.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay, any further questions or discussion? All right, then I move to adjourn. Do I have a second? Sorry. Board Member Kravitz, seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned at 5:18.